This is the third part of Lecture 2 on Module 8 in the Apologia science book. Let's continue looking at the 6 different problems of uniformitarianism. The fifth one is that uniformitarians must assume the existence of paraconformities. Now, what are paraconformities? Well, in the textbook, Dr. Weil defines it as an unconformity that has been disguised so that it does not look like an unconformity at all. Well, what are all these unconformities? Well, remember a few modules back we looked at this particular graphic here that reminds us that an unconformity is a surface of erosion that separates one layer of rock from another. So if you had 2 layers of rock and in between them was this obvious erosion that had occurred, then that would be an unconformity. Now those can come in a variety of ways. You can have an angular unconformity where the rock strata below are tilted at an angle relative to the rock strata above. A disconformity is when both of the layers are sedimentary rock. A nonconformity is when you have sedimentary rock on top of igneous or metamorphic. And then we listed this paraconformity and said we would explain that in Module 8. Well, here we are in Module 8, so it's time to explain this. Recall the geological column that the uniformitarianist has put together. All these different layers of rock with their index fossils have been meshed together from all these regions around the world. Now let's say, for example, that the geologist goes out into a new region of the world and starts digging. So as he digs down into this first layer, he finds this index fossil that we are representing with the dash. And he says, I see that one, and I compare that with my geological column, and I know that this is the layer of rock that we are calling layer 6. He continues to dig down some more, and he finds some fossils that we're labeling as the index fossil X. He compares that with the geological column and says, okay, this is the layer that we're calling layer 5 of this particular time period. He continues to dig down, and in the next layer he finds the index fossil, which we've done here with the box or the square. And he says, okay, this is layer 3. But you'll notice that there's something missing. There's no layer 4 here. Now, with this layer missing, we would expect an unconformity to be there, because layer 4 should have been laid down here and then eroded away, and you should see some signs of that erosion, that surface of erosion that would separate layer 3 and 5. So we would expect to see an unconformity there. But if there isn't any evidence of an angular unconformity or a non or a disconformity, if it's not there, then in order to make this fit the geological column, the geologist will assign a paraconformity in order to explain this abnormality. Try and understand that what's happening here is they're trying to force this to fit into the geological column. And even though there's no evidence that layer 4 was there and eroded away, they're assuming that that must have happened because the geological column must be correct. And if there is no evidence of it, we'll just call it a paraconformity to explain it away. Well, I kind of had a hard time with this when I first read it in the book, and I thought, oh come on, they can't really think and just make this up to assume that this is right. So I went out and looked at what a geologist, a uniformitarian geologist, their explanation for what a paraconformity was. And I found that here, listed right here was the definition I found. When an unconformity is simply due to a non-deposition, in other words, the sedimentation just wasn't laid down. If there's an unconformity just because there's nothing there, then we term that a paraconformity. Beds above and below a paraconformity are parallel, and the unconformity is identified by some evidence, like the lack of certain diagnostic zone fossils, those are index fossils, in some horizon or layer of rock. So they really are admitting here by this definition, they're saying, listen, an unconformity is simply when we're missing a layer of rock, and we think it should be there because of this geological column, and therefore we're just going to say, well, it must have been there, and we'll call it a paraconformity. So Dr. Weil concludes this by saying that even though the layer in question has no evidence of erosion, the uniformitarian geologist assumes there must be an unconformity at that point because there must have been millions of years between the deposition of the index fossils. So this one is pretty hard to understand, well, not so much to understand, but to believe that they actually would put all that, that they would put that in there just to make this fit with the geological column.